In this video, I'm going to give you a few pointers on preparing repertoire to play on the organ during a church service. As you begin to prepare a new piece, when you sit down to learn it for the first time, the first thing you'll do, of course, is learn the notes. You might find it more comfortable to do this very early stage at home on your piano, and then once you have a basic familiarity with the music, you might then bring it to the organ. The first stage of practicing on the organ will of course involve coordinating hands and feet together. As you do this, you'll want to use a simple, clear registration where you can easily hear wrong notes or any unevenness in the touch. On this organ, I'd be inclined to use something like the stock diapason on its own, because it makes the action light with just one stop, and each note is very crisp and very clear. On the pedal, there are a few options. You want the low pitch of the bourdon, but perhaps you might like to use an 8-foot stop as well. Here we have the luxury of two 8-foot stops. We have the Italian Principal 8 and then the softer bass flute 8. Remember, when you're practicing, it's not so important to worry about balance. It's more important that you can hear all of the parts for yourself. So you might use the Italian Principal on the pedal and the stock diapason on the grate for the manuals as you practice, so that you can hear all of the parts clearly. That's what I might use on this organ. The piece that I'm going to use as an example is a Chaconne in F minor by Johanna Pachelbel. And this is a shortened version of this work, which is found in Book 1 of the Oxford Service Music for Organ, the Manual and Pedals series. This piece is a very good piece to play for someone who is beginning with the pedals, because the pedal line is simple and repetitive. It's just 4 notes: F, E flat, D flat, C. And the manual textures evolve over it. You can practice the right hand and left hand separately and then together, and it's worth playing these slowly and clearly on a clear registration so that you can hear exactly where the imperfections might be. You want to leave enough space that each of the notes can be heard clearly. You don't want to play something too legato, because that way it loses some of its rhythmical clarity, particularly with Baroque music. Then it's a matter of coordinating the hands and feet together. Right hand and pedal to begin. Making sure that there are no hesitations in the manual or the pedal, and that the pedal notes go down at exactly the same time as the notes in the manual. Likewise, we can practice the left hand and pedal together. You'll notice on this registration that the pedal stop is very clear and very easy to hear. Another thing to bear in mind as you practice a piece is the clarity of touch. I'm going to go back to a piece that I played an excerpt from earlier on, which is the second part of a voluntary by John James, an 18th century English composer, and it's found in volume 4 of the Novello English Organ Music Anthology series. There's a lot of fast moving passages in this piece, so it's important to focus on clarity of touch. It starts off with an ornament in the right hand, and then semiquavers. It's worth practicing this with particular emphasis on every finger, so that you can be sure that you're building up evenness in the fingers, which will translate into evenness in the sound. Here it is more staccato. Slightly slower, so that I can really focus on the articulation of every single note. If you find it difficult to play these semiquaver passages without blemishes, you can work on the evenness of touch by playing dotted rhythms. That rather than playing 4 even semiquavers, you play long, short, like this. Instead of this passage, we wait at long, short. That's a useful way of focusing on every second note, which is practicing those notes and the precision behind the finger attack on those notes specifically. But in order to make sure that we're learning this evenly, we need to do the opposite as well. Short, long. And you'll find after doing that a couple of times, long, short, and short, long. After a couple of times, you'll find it's much easier to play it evenly when you return to the original rhythm, and that you'll have much more control over the articulation and touch by doing it that way. This method can be a little bit confusing when there are lots of different varying rhythms, but when you have long passages of semiquavers only, for example, or quavers, it can be a really useful practice technique, particularly for fast music where clarity is important. Another thing to bear in mind as you're practicing in an empty church is that the sound of the organ will change when there are people sitting in the pews. Particularly if a service is very busy and you have a full church, you'll find that the people absorb a lot of the sound of the organ. And so while you might rely on echo when you're practicing, you won't have so much echo when there are people in the church. So that's something else to bear in mind. You might find that long pauses in the music sound less dramatic when the church is full, because the organ doesn't echo or resound so much as it does when you're practicing in an empty church. Once you've learned the music, there is of course a final stage to get through between knowing the piece well and then being able to perform it. For some people this is no problem at all. Some people don't suffer from nerves at all. But many organists, even very accomplished ones, find playing a voluntary in public for the first time a nerve-wracking experience. So how can we help to improve this? Well, one of the things that you can do is that you could perform your voluntary for a small group of friends who might give you some feedback, or who might simply just be listening ears to help you get over the initial nerves when you're playing a piece in public for the first time. And if you do this when you come to play it in church for the first time, it will be a less nerve-wracking experience. I hope you found these videos about choosing and preparing organ voluntaries useful. If you look on the Church Music Dublin website, you'll find more resources and videos. Thank you.